What did just take place this Saturday? What happened here in Minnesota?
Well, actually, something took place last 2 Saturdays. We have 8 congressional districts in the state of Minnesota, and each congressional district gets 3 delegates to the national convention down in Tampa. Ron Paul's organization is pretty much the only presidential organization in the state of Minnesota. Meaning Santorum didn't organize much, and Mitt Romney, I can't tell, has any organization, and certainly not Newt Gingrich.
Well, you could say he has the establishment behind him.
Yeah, but there's a difference between people wanting to support a candidate and people actually going out there and setting up district leaders, BPOU leaders, precinct leaders. Ron Paul did a very good job in the state of Minnesota, and what he ended up doing is turning out a big crowd to go vote for delegates. And what he ended up doing in the last 2 weekends is taking 20 out of the 24 delegate spots that were available to the national convention.
20 out of 24. Wouldn't you think that that's newsworthy?
I would say that's pretty newsworthy, considering there's 40 delegates coming from the state of Minnesota. So Ron Paul, at the worst, has at least tied for first. If not, if he picks up one, which he will probably have the majority of the delegates at the state convention, and there's 13 up for play there. There's a good chance Ron Paul's going to have a big majority in Minnesota.
Does it seem to you, Jake, that the media tries to make the news rather than report the news?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. I think they're missing a big story here, what's going on with the caucus states like Minnesota. They're not reporting where the delegates come from. If you're doing an honest job as a media source, you would have to try to
I didn't see any media presence at our caucus at the CD4, so they weren't too interested in finding out results there.
Right, but what they are doing, the national media at least, and I think the local media, is they're pretty much crowning Mitt Romney as the victor, and that's not the case at this point.
I've seen this meme in the media lately, and in the GOP, they're referring to the Ron Paul camp now as the Ron Paul establishment.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I saw that. It's pretty funny.
It is pretty funny because we're certainly the grassroots force, and we're going up against the establishment. We don't have the media giving us fair coverage. In fact, we're getting almost a blackout, and when we do get coverage, it's always in a negative light.
Yeah. Do I think Ron Paul's got a chance of getting the nomination or the endorsement at the Tampa convention? It's slight. It's a slight chance, but there is a chance, and no one's been crowned the victor of the endorsement yet. Okay. But a congressman, what is it?
Well, let me interrupt you. Do you think that the media in its coverage of the election, if it were more fair, could change that to?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think if they've done a terrible job reporting Ron Paul's campaign and don't give him a fair shake, if they did, it would get into more households. And that's what journalists like you do a good job at, is getting that to people that might not understand it. But a lot of people are still stuck with traditional media, print, and maybe your main news source, 6 o'clock evening news, and they're not getting that story from that way.
The Ron Paul camp does have a very strong presence on the internet and amongst young folks. We, like you said, we just dominated the last caucuses here in Minnesota, getting 20 out of 24. However, across the general public, a lot of people still don't know much about Ron Paul.
Right.
Some people don't even know who he is, and those that do think he doesn't have a flying chance in the wind, But
with that said, when he's put up against Barack Obama, most polls show him at a dead heat.
Exactly. So, what can we do, knowing that we are up against this media blockade, to change that?
Sure.
I mean, how can we break through? Do you have a message for all the Ron Paul supporters and the activists out there? I mean, what should we be doing, in your opinion, to change that?
Well, I'll tell you what I do, and I'm just one method of getting that news out. I'm a columnist, and I use social media. My columns will sometimes talk about those issues that don't get a lot of light in the mainstream media, and then on social media I'll inform my network of friends and family about Ron Paul or what other liberty issue I want them to know about. Everyone knows Facebook is the most wonderful company in the world, right? It's got 500 million users, right? Well, that's a bigger market than any news source out there. So if you could get your word out on something like Facebook or on Twitter, you're doing a far better job than the CBS Evening News. And that's actually why I think he's got a chance in this election cycle, and that's why I think his numbers are that much better than they were in 2008. And if our economy can stand with it, if Romney's elected or Obama gets another term in 2016, it could be that much better for whatever our liberty candidate is at that point.
But again, then, so how do we get through in the mainstream media? How do we change that blockade?
There are methods of getting that out, and here's a good case in point. I think it was about a month ago, SOPA and PIPA were coming up on the docket in the legislature, and a bunch of media sites like Wikipedia and I think Google put out the message, because I don't think the mainstream media would have covered that if it wasn't for that effort by those organizations. So
yeah, it does seem as though the alternative media is really forcing a lot of issues into the mainstream now.
Right.
So obviously it's we've shown ourselves that it can be done.
Right.
It's like we've almost allowed a little bit of that apathy back into our lives. We've just accepted as fact that the media ignores us. And aren't we a large enough force now where we can say enough is enough?
That's right. But it's not just about being a large force, it's about, even if we're a minority group in the big context of it, we're a very vocal and a very energetic minority. And that's all it sometimes takes. It's just a very vocal
and informed
to spread brush fires in the minds of fellow men.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. They had a quote here from Katie Nadeau, a party activist, and she put out a tweet that they thought interesting to quote. They said, "Ron Paul libertarians took the Republicans out of the Minnesota Republican Party today," referring to Saturday's caucus or convention. Innuendo here, though, is that it's an infiltration by the Libertarian Party.
Right.
So what would you say to that?
Well, I think, and this is something that a lot of people are talking about, especially in the Republican establishment, is that they're taking over, right? The Ron Paul people, how dare they take over? And I refer them just as a liberty crowd, because it's also Tea Party members, and they're not all Ron Paul people, but the majority of these guys are, and for good reasons, because they understand he's the only one that's for limited government. But what's wrong with this fresh movement coming into the Republican Party? You have to look at what's happened with the establishment Republican Party. We have guys voting for things like TARP, for provisions in the NDAA allowing assassination by our president. They have been a no-show on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, for God's sakes, we're in Afghanistan for 10 years. This is what we get with the Republican Party, voting for debt ceiling increases, even under a presidential administration. We get prescription Part D Medicare. We got No Child Left Behind, so an expansion of the Department of Education, which at one point Republicans were absolutely against, even the establishment of that department.
Yeah, except for Newt Gingrich.
Yeah, why do we still have a Department of Energy? Why is there a HUD? Why are all these large programs still in existence in the federal government? If this is an infiltration by the libertarian movement, then
maybe long overdue.
I have to ask, what's so bad about that? Look what we've gotten under you guys. So.